this is Miss Conley. Just want to say hi. Hope everybody's doing well. I miss you guys, and this is for my students, past, present, maybe future. But I thought I would share a book with you guys every day, and I would read, chapters of the book, maybe like 1 or 2 chapters a day. But as you can see, I have no makeup on. I have a hat on, and I'm just chilling right now. So this is me, unfurnished, whatever you want to call it. But we're here, and we're quarantined, and we're staying home. And so we hope you guys are staying safe and sound in your homes, and hope you're finding things to do. So I'm going to read you a story that I've had my third block already read, and I know that Miss Erickson's third block has already read it too, but I thought it would be a good book. So I really like this book a lot. I think it's awesome, but I wanted to share it with you guys. So I'm going to read you 2 chapters, and then I'll read some more tomorrow. So the book is called Freedom Crossing. Sorry, it's backwards. But I'm going to read you Freedom Crossing. This is such a cool book. It's about the Underground Railroad, and not Civil War just yet, but has to do with the Underground Railroad and family and decisions they have to make and so on. So it's an awesome book. It's by Margaret Goff Clark. Sorry, it's backwards, but it's really cool. So I'm going to read the first 2 chapters, and then I will come back and read 2 more tomorrow. So here we go. Okay, so I'm back with the book, and we're going to start out with the first chapter called Midnight Visitors, and we'll go from there. 12:30, Laura Eastman had been lying awake for nearly 2 hours, waiting for sleep that would not come. From the oak tree outside her window, she heard a screech owl's quavery call. A moment later came the mournful howling of a pack of dogs. Laura punched her pillow despairingly. 2 weeks had passed since she returned to the family farm near Lewiston, New York, and everything still seemed strange and unfamiliar. The autumn smells of dry leaves and fallen apples, the brisk, cool air of the western New York state, and most of all, the hard twang of northern voices were almost foreign to her after living for 4 years in the South. Even her own father seemed like a stranger, married to a new wife, and Bert, her brother, had changed most of all. Laura opened her eyes and stared into the dark. Soon she could make out the white lace curtains at the windows. The sight comforted her. Sorry. At least this room where she slept for the first 11 years of her life felt like home. Trying to adjust here. Laura sat here sewing. The long rays of the afternoon sun fell across the braided rug. She would feel content for a little while. Then she could forget the homesickness for Virginia and her Aunt Ruth and Uncle Jim. She could even forget her brother Bert's coolness toward her. Again the dogs howled, this time to the east, toward Lockport and a little nearer the house. As she listened, a new sound reached her ears, a faint tap-tap. She held her breath to hear better. Yes, something or someone was tapping downstairs, but no one was there. She and Bert were the only ones in the house this Friday night. Their father and stepmother had taken a wagon load of apples and potatoes to Saturday market in Buffalo. Perhaps it was a branch knocking against a window, but there was no wind. How Laura wished their old dog Prince were still alive. She had always felt protected with Prince around. From the room down the hall came the noise of Bert's bed creaking. She could hear the shuffle of carpet slippers as he went down the back stairs to the kitchen. So he had heard the tapping too. A moment later, the outside door opened, and there was a soft murmur of voices. Laura sat up in bed. Visitors? At this late hour? Shivering in the cool September air, she crossed to her door and opened it wider. Someone was in the kitchen talking to Bert, but the voices were so low she couldn't make out what was being said. As she padded down the hall to the stairs, she heard Bert say, "I'll fetch a lamp." A deep voice answered quickly, "Wait, first let me draw the curtains." That voice had a familiar ring. Laura still wasn't sure who was speaking, but she had had the happy feeling that there was an old friend in the kitchen. Her bare feet were numb. She shook with the cold. Hurriedly, she returned to the room for slippers and a robe, and then hurried back to the stairs, eager to join Bert and the visitor. Someone had lighted a lamp, for now a glow of light came through the partially open door at the foot of the stairs. A deep voice was saying, "This is Martin Page. He's had a long, hard trip up from North Carolina." Laura paused, so there were two visitors. A chair scraped on the floor, and Bert said in his best company manner, "Please sit down, Martin." The visitor from North Carolina must be someone important for Bert to be so polite, yet he had called him by his first name. He'd do that only if Martin were a young person. A soft voice replied, "Thank you, sir." Yes, the voice was young. Laura felt a familiar pang of homesickness at the sound of the southern accent. She started down the stairs. Bert should know better than to entertain company in the kitchen, even if it was late at night. Just as she reached the bottom of the stairs, the door in front of her closed softly. As she put out her hand to open it, she heard Bert say, "I hope Laura doesn't wake up." Startled, Laura pulled back her hand and stood motionless. A deep voice asked, "Doesn't she know about your station?" No, Bert answered slowly. "You know, she's been living down in Virginia with my aunt and uncle for 4 years, ever since Mother died. She's only been back here 2 weeks. Pa sent for her as soon as he got married again." "Oh, yes, you've got a stepmother now. How do you like that?" "Well, Joel, I like it fine," Bert said earnestly. "Abby, that's what she said to call her. She's good to all of us, and she understands about the station. It's Laura we have to worry about. Pa says we better not take in any fugitives till we find out for sure how she feels." Laura stood in the dark, her heart pounding. It was Joel Todd who was in the kitchen with Bert. Why he had come here in the middle of the night and with a visitor from the south. Laura had never before listened in on people's conversations, but she couldn't seem to move. Why was Pa taking in fugitives? Laura had a suspicion that was too frightening and strange for her to believe. Bert was still talking. "Maybe she's picked up some southern ideas. Didn't you know you weren't supposed to bring anyone here?" "Yes," Joel answered. "My pa told me you weren't hiding anyone for a few weeks. But we're desperate. When will your folks be back?" "Early Sunday morning. They're staying over with Uncle Daniel in Buffalo and bringing him back here for a visit." "Then I'll have to leave it to you," said Joel. "There's a pack of slave hunters in Lewiston asking questions and studying every face that goes by. Somehow they know about Martin." Now the conversation in the kitchen became painfully clear to Laura. The Southerner in the kitchen, Martin Page, must be a fugitive slave. Pa and Bert and Joel must belong to the Underground Railroad that Uncle Jim and Aunt Ruth hated so much. "It's no railroad," Uncle Jim had said. "It's a secret organization for sneaking slaves away from their owners. Those Underground Railroaders have been worse than ever since the fugitive slave law was passed in 1850. I say anyone who helps a slave escape is a thief, because a slave is just as much a man's property as his cow or horse." Laura's hand strayed toward the doorknob. She shouldn't be standing here in the dark listening in secret. But if she went into the kitchen, Bert would be cross because she had overheard him. Instead of turning the knob, she raised her hand to the thick plait of sand-colored hair that hung down her back. This wasn't the way she wanted Joel to see her for the first time in 4 years, in her old pink flannel robe, with her hair skinned back from her face and braided for the night. Bert's voice broke into her thoughts. "Can't someone else take him in? My Uncle Daniel thinks it's wicked to help slaves escape. He might kick up something fierce if he saw Martin. And there's Laura." He stopped abruptly. Joel Todd said, "Martin may be in some danger if he stays here, but he's sure to be caught if you don't take him in. Pa and I will pick him up before your uncle gets here. I can't believe Laura would wish him harm, even if she has acquired some southern ideas. She was always kind-hearted." Laura could hear the amusement in his voice as he went on. "I remember how she lectured me when I caught a rabbit in a trap. I'd set it for the fox that had been raiding our chicken coop. She wasn't more than 11 at the time, but she made me feel like the meanest fellow alive." Laura remembered well about the rabbit. In those days, she and Joel were playmates. He never seemed to mind that she was 2 years younger than he. What fun they'd had together. Usually Bert had tagged along as they looked for arrowheads along the bank of the Niagara River or searched for fields and woods around Lewiston for wild strawberries and blackberries. Every fall they had gathered great bags of walnuts and chestnuts and butternuts. Her mother had called her a tomboy, but her father had said, "Let her go. She's healthier than those pasty-faced little girls who never poke their noses out of doors." That day, the day of the rabbit, they had gone out to the chicken coop behind the Todd's house to gather the eggs. She had gone in first, and for a moment, dazzled by the sun outside, she could see nothing, though at once she had heard a high, peculiar whine. Then her eyes had cleared, and she saw the rabbit. It was a young rabbit, crouched close to the left-hand wall of the coop, and it was crying like a baby. She could recall how she had run forward to see what was the matter with it, and how she had seen that it was caught in a trap and was badly hurt. Joel had come up behind her and said, "Go on outside. I'll take care of it." A moment later, the awful crying noise stopped, and she thought the rabbit was all right after all. But when Joel came outside, he told her, "I had to kill it." Sorry. Wait a minute. Oh, my bad. Sorry. There we go. She had cried then and had stormed to him. He stood there, and he hadn't even tried to stop her when she pounded his chest with her fists. "Why did you trap that rabbit?" she demanded. "I didn't aim to catch a rabbit. You shouldn't have set the trap where the rabbit could get in it." "I didn't mean to. We've been losing chickens to a fox." "You shouldn't trap anything. Traps hurt too much." The rabbit's pain-filled eyes seemed to haunt her. "I hate you," she screamed, and ran home. In an hour or so, she had calmed down enough to admit to herself that Joel had to protect his chickens from the fox. But she was too proud to go back to apologize. For several days after that, she hadn't played with Joel. Then he had come to her house with a small, jet-black kitten as a peace offering, and she had gone out with him to look for chestnuts in the woods. That day had been such a happy one. Joel had been so kind to her, they were even better friends than before. But only a week after that, tragedy had struck. Her mother died of typhoid fever, and Laura, heartbroken, had been sent to Virginia to live with her Aunt Ruth and Uncle Jim. "A womanless house is no place for a girl to grow up in," her father had said. "Ruth is childless, and she wants Laura." Now Joel Todd was only a few feet away beyond the door. She wondered how he looked. It was hard to realize that the deep voice belonged to him. But of course he was 17 by now, practically a man. "Martin's worn out. He's only 12 years old." That was Joel's voice. Laura could hear the sympathy in it when he went on. "He came last night to a house on 6th Street, but one of those slave hunters got suspicious and came around with a search warrant. Martin got out the back way and headed for the woods. That's where he's been hiding all day, poor fellow. They had the dogs on his trail. I don't know how he managed to escape them. I found him not an hour ago, perched in a tree like a bird." This was the closest house, and being outside town, probably the safest. Then, too, the word's gotten around here that you have a young Southerner living here. Again, Laura heard the amusement in his tone. "I hear she talks like a real Dixie Belle. Folks aren't like to suspect a fugitive would hide out in the same house with a girl from down south." There was a brief silence before Joel asked, "Do you think she'd talk?" A burst of anger made Laura forget all caution. Bert and Joel acted as if she were some terrible monster. How dare they talk that way about her behind her back? She flung the door open with a crash that brought the three in the dimly lighted kitchen to their feet. "Stop worrying what Laura will do," she cried. "I don't care if Martin goes or stays." All right, just a second here. There we go. Okay, next chapter, dangerous business. Oops, I'm sorry. There, we got to adjust. Okay. Complete silence followed Laura's outburst. For a moment, she enjoyed the look of gaping surprise on the three faces that were turned toward her. She saw Bert's shock change to anger, while Martin's eyes, white in his dark face, rolled toward the back door, as if searching for escape. How small he was, thought Laura. Much smaller than Bert, though he was only a year younger. Joel Todd came toward her, and Laura was amazed at his height and breadth of his shoulders. He was a man for sure. Searching his face for traces of her playmate, she noticed that his thick brown hair still lopped onto his forehead, but his lean cheeks and jaw were completely unfamiliar. His eyes held no hint of the friendly warmth that she remembered. They regarded her coolly as they made a mock bow. "I see we have an eavesdropper in our midst," he said. Laura drew in a quick breath and lifted her head defiantly. "All right, I was listening. I didn't like what I heard." Eavesdroppers seldom hear good of themselves. I'm not talking about myself, said Laura sharply. I mean, I'm sorry to find out you and Pa and Bert are breaking the law. Joel's eyes narrowed. It's a law that ought to be broken. Do you think you know more about what's right than the Congress of the United States? Not ordinarily, but in this case I do. It's a cruel law that says we have to send fugitive slaves back to their masters. Joel pushed a chair toward her. Here, sit down so Martin can get off his feet. Laura considered defying him. He cared more for that runaway's comfort than hers. She glanced at Martin. He was tired. The way his knees were sagging, he'd be on the floor in another minute. She dropped into the chair. Please sit down, Martin, she said politely. She kept her eyes on him, trying to ignore Joel's critical gaze. Martin, when was the last time you ate? He cocked his head as searching his memory. I had supper night before last, and I found some chestnuts in the woods today. Just as I thought. Laura looked indignantly at her brother. He's hungry, and you haven't offered him a thing to eat. For the first time since she had come into the kitchen, Joel looked at Laura with approval. Good for you, he said. Laura, doggedly honest, replied, I don't think Martin should be here, but since he is, he should be fed. Bert seized the poker and lifted one of the two lids on the top of the little cook stove. Joel said quickly, Don't stir up the fire. The sparks and smoke might draw notice to the house. Bert put aside the poker. I didn't think. I'll see what I can find ready to eat. He crossed to the cellar door behind the stove and disappeared down the stairs. Shortly he returned with a half-baked ham, butter, and a jug of milk. As he set them on the table, he remarked proudly, It's a wonder the way my stepmother keeps the larder full. Pa and I never ate half so well when we were batching it. Laura set out plates and mugs. Where do you keep the bread? She asked her brother. Bert produced a loaf of homemade bread from a cupboard beside the sink. Joel said in obvious surprise, You've been home 2 weeks, Laura, and you didn't know where the bread was? Without answering him, Laura began to slice the bread. It was no use explaining, she thought. He'd never understand how it had been in Virginia, where Sukey and Della did all the kitchen work. And Aunt Ruth merely planned the meals. Laura had been able to cook as well as a woman when she first went south, but she rarely helped with the meals during the past 4 years. Aunt Ruth thought it was more important and fitting for her to learn to sew a fine seam and practice her music lessons, for if she stayed in Virginia, she would marry the son of a wealthy planter and would always have slaves to do the work of the house. When the food was ready, Bert said, Time to eat, Martin. You too, Joel. Martin said politely, You're very kind, sir. Laura was puzzled by the way he talked. He didn't sound like the slave she had known, but almost as if he had been to school. When they were seated around the table, she couldn't help noticing that, hungry as Martin must be, he didn't bolt his food. He must have had a good master who taught him well. Martin's expected in Canada, remarked Joel, spreading butter onto a piece of bread. Tomorrow, from midnight until 2 o'clock in the morning, his father will wait for him on the Canadian shore of North Queenston. Mr. Page is already settled in Niagara on Lake Ontario with his wife and, I believe, 2 other children. Martin spoke up. That's right, Master Todd. I've got a brother 9 years old and a baby sister. Joel said, All we have to do is get Martin across the Niagara River tomorrow night. How are we going to do that? Asked Bert. Pa never let me go with him. He sounded resentful. I should have gone, and then I know what to do now. Don't worry about it, Joel answered. It's all arranged. A fisherman will let his boat drift downstream tomorrow night just before midnight. I suppose I should stay tonight, since it's past midnight now, but you know what I mean. At any rate, the fisherman will pull ashore a certain spot to untangle his lines. Where? Asked Bert. For a long moment, Joel's level gray eyes met Bert's. Then he shook his head. You don't need to know. My father and I will come back here after the moon sets tomorrow night and take Martin there. Bert pulled back as if he had been slapped. I wouldn't tell, he muttered. Joel raised his hand for silence. Listen. He quietly pushed back his chair and went to the door, where he held his ear close to the crack. Then he moved to the window to tuck the thick homespun curtain more securely against the frame. In the stillness, Laura heard the same howling she had noticed before. Now it came from the south, but it was closer than ever. Probably those were the dogs that were searching for Martin. However, Joel didn't seem concerned about the dogs. I thought I heard someone outside the door, he said as he returned to the table. I've never seen such a crowd after one fugitive. He smiled at Martin. You must be valuable. Martin answered soberly, my master likes to catch any runaway, so he can take him back and show the other slaves it doesn't pay to escape from him. Laura felt a cold shudder run up her back. She had heard the runaways were sometimes beaten. Martin was so thin he didn't look able to take such punishment. But tales of masters who beat slaves were rarely true, she reminded herself. Uncle Jim said those tales were made up to get sympathy. Bert asked, are there slave catchers all around Lewiston? Laura knew he was still trying to decide whether or not to keep Martin. Joel answered with a brief yes. Bert looked at Laura and then away. I wish Pa was home. Joel frowned and stood up. He paced impatiently the length of the kitchen and back. Bert, make up your own mind. I tell you, I don't know another place I'd dare take Martin tonight. I doubt it if it would even be safe to take him out that door. We may have been followed here. He pushed back his forelock. We've had a fugitive at our house for 2 days, and we've been watched so close we haven't been able to send him across the river. Martin looked up with interest. What's his name? George. That's the only name he'll tell us. He says he was given his master's last name, and he wants to forget that. When he's a free man, he'll take a new name of his own choosing. Maybe some of the slave catchers are looking for George, suggested Bert. Joel shook his head. I don't think they know anything about him. They all ask about a boy named Martin Page, and they have his description. Of course, they'll pick up any black person they see, but right now, it's Martin they're hunting. Bert came to a decision. We'll keep him. I'm sure that's what Pa would do. I don't know where we'll hide him, though. Joel looked surprised. Hide him in the usual place, of course. Laura has the room where the trapdoor is, Bert explained. He kept his eyes away from his sister. Oh, Joel shrugged. Let her sleep someplace else tonight. Laura seethed with anger. They acted as if she weren't in the room. I don't know anything about a trapdoor. Sorry, hold on. A trapdoor in my room. You must have put that in while I was in Virginia. But do either of you realize what would happen to Pa if you got caught hiding Martin, she demanded. We know the law, said Joel. The fine for helping a runaway is $1,000, plus maybe another $1,000 to pay the cost of the slave if he escapes. That's $2,000, Laura gasped. We might lose our farm. But your Pa isn't involved this time, Joel protested. It's all my doing. If Martin's found in our house, Pa will get the blame, declared Laura. I'll say leaving Martin here was my own idea, Joel assured her. Bert's only 13, so I figure the law won't hold him accountable. Laura scoffed. And supposing you take the blame, where will you get $2,000? Joel grinned. You're right. No one could get that much money from me. Guess I'd have to cool my heels in jail for about 6 months. His smile disappeared. No one's going to know Martin's here. That is, unless you tell them. Laura tried to match the coolness of his eyes and failed. I'm no tattletale, she said angrily. Good. Then go up and get the things you want out of your room before we bring Martin up. Laura stared at Joel in disbelief. Was it possible he was ordering her out of her own room? Again, the feeling of homesickness and aloneness swept over her. She thought of her clothes spread over a chair, and her bed, with the covers tossed back, the bookshelf over her desk. This runaway slave had no right to her room. She faced Joel rebelliously. You'll have to find another place to hide Martin. I'm not giving up my room. So there you go. There's the first 2 chapters of Freedom Crossing. Hopefully you're enjoying it so far. I'm going to read 2 more chapters tomorrow. It does get a little bit more suspenseful, and it's really cool. I figured I would do this one because we were studying the Civil War and Reconstruction before we stopped school for a while. So I know that my 3rd block and Miss Erickson's 3rd block have already read it, but I thought it would be a cool, book to share with others who haven't heard it, or if you have, then you can kind of go over it with me again and read it again with me. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you tomorrow.